Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, we begin Parakah Ba'asa, the 14th chapter in the Hilchos Assuros, in the laws of forbidden food items in the Rambam Sefer Kedusha, the book of sanctity. And now we go into more general ideas, which we just finished speaking about Yain Nesach and all its related laws, and we spoke about the kosher species and the non-kosher, and in the kosher what's forbidden, that of chaylev and dam, giranoshe. Now the Rambam discussed in this chapter regarding the liabilities and the exemptions regarding eating something prohibited. So Rambam opens up in Halacha Aleph regarding, first of all, the measurement in regards to the amount of food being eaten to be liable. As Rambam says, Kol Isur Machal Shabbat, all prohibited food items in the Torah, Shi'urin, their measurements to be liable for the punishments, are because I is being in a medium-sized size Aleph. That's Ben Lamalkas, whether for lashes, Ben Lakaris, whether for karis, which is one type of death from heaven, Ben Lamisa D'Shemayim, which is a different type of death from the hand of heaven. Ukvar Biyan already explained the first parak in the Hilchos Isur Biyah and Halacha Zayin, Shekol Mechud Karis, whoever is liable for karis, or Misa D'Shemayim, or death at the hands of heaven, Al Michael, for a food item, Loika, that he gets lashes. That's what the courts over here do for that death penalty in the hands of Shemayim. Here we go ahead and we administer lashes. Halacha Beis says Rambam Shir, and this measurement, Im Kolashim, with all measurements in the Torah, Halacha Meshim Sinai, they're all halachas that are handed down from tradition from Moshe from Har Sinai. Now, V'asam that Torah Lechel Kolshu Midav Ha'asa. The truth is that although we're saying that the punishments require measurement, but biblically there's actually a prohibition to eat even minute amount. What's called Chatzi Shir, even half of the measurement is Asur Minat Torah. Ain't a loika, but the thing is, we're only saying biblically you don't get lashes. In Al Kazais, only if you eat the size of an olive. Now, if you eat anything that's less than the measurement of that size of a medium-sized olive, so although biblically there's no lashes, but we'd give him rabbinic lashes, rebellious for having violated the biblical law. Now, Halacha Gimel. This that we said it's the size of an olive, is chutz mishal bein hashanayim, except for what gets stuck between the teeth. That's not counted towards the zayis. Avamashal bein hachanichayim, but what's between the gums, what's stuck in the palate and just doesn't go down, that's mitzvah from mashal that actually combines for what he swallowed. The reason is sharinen groinem because his throat, his palate actually got pleasure from an olive size of prohibited food. And conscious what got stuck in the teeth, the palate doesn't enjoy because it's in the teeth. So as long as one got the pleasure of the groiner, of the palate, even though it doesn't have mayav, doesn't have the pleasure in his stomach, it didn't get into his stomach, doesn't make a difference, it's still going to be liable. And moreover, even if you only have half olive size of the prohibited food, and he eats the half olive and he vomits it and he throws it up, and he again re-swallows, he eats again. That half olive that he had put down and went back up, Chayiv is going to be liable for eating a share of a kizayis to be liable for the lashes. Because the liability is for having palate pleasure of a prohibited item in the size of an olive, and he had it, albeit in two different times, within the amount of time that he could, and therefore he would be liable. Now, Allah Dal Ram continues regarding in qualifying this measurement of a gazayis in regards to if something expands or if it shrinks. It says Ram gazayis chaylev, an olive size of prohibited fats of an animal, or nevela, or of a dead, unslaughtered animal, or pigul, or if it had a machshav of a carbon to be done beyond its time, which also invalidates a nicer or was left over its time. Whatever the isser that we're talking about that's prohibited to eat, it was left in the sun and it shriveled up. Someone eats it is going to be exempt because ultimately he didn't eat the size of a gazais. Now let's say let's say put it back into the rain and then it swelled. Well, then chayav and olav, karas and malchus, and depending on whatever the isser is, you'll be liable because ultimately it started of a gazais and the end of a gazais. And he ate it as the size of a gazais, he's going to be liable. Now let's say let's say it actually started off the entity as it was naturally was less than the gazais. The nitpach b'amal gazais, then it got inflated, and now it's the size of gazais. So it's prohibited, but we're not going to get lashes because ultimately the entity as itself, as it started off with, is not the share of a gazais. Allah Ram continues regarding the combination of prohibitions to be liable for the measurement of a gazais. Says the Rambam, Kvar Biyan already explained in the fourth parak, Halacha Tazayin Yud Zayin, Shekol Isun Shabbat, all prohibitions in the Torah, Ein Mitzvah from Zem Zel they're not combined one with the other to be liable for the measurement of gazais. That's that isser, and you never had a share of any one isser. Chutz min b'sad nevela and b'sad treifa, except for nevela meat with treifa meat, because ultimately treifa is a moral defect. It's really on its way. It's becoming a nevela. And b'isur nazir sheis bar b'mekayim, and the prohibitions of a nazir, although those are different prohibitions, but it's all under the same category, which is explained in their place over there in the third parak in Hilchos Naziris. That's where they combine, but generally different isurim do not combine. And v'chamesh is mini tvua. the 5 types of grain, ukamachat shalem, their flour, babetzega shalem, their dough, they're also hakum some like gazayas. They all combine to be, although that's wheat and that's barley, they can combine for the shear of an olive size. Bein l'sechamas b'Pesach, whether for the prohibition of having leavening on Pesach, bein l'sechadish b'lefnei or eating from the new grain before the barley offering on the 16th of Nisan, and bein l'isuri meiser sheni u'trumas, whether for the prohibition of the second tithe, which lets us someone eats a kazayis of them out of Yerushalayim, is going to get lashes even though that's barley and that's wheat, or trumas, and for eating trumas. There, although they're different types of grains, but it's all from that same isser of chadash or chametz, and therefore there it would be combining, but generally different issurim do not combine. Now, Allah above, it says Rabbi Yeroli on this theme. It says it appears to me any species that's obligated in separating trumas to give to the kain, the maisus, and the tithes to give to the Levi, and so on. Mitzdarf lekazayis betabel. They do combine for the size of an olive amount when it's in its untithed state. And the reason because although that's one type of food and that's another type of food, they're both the halachic isser of tevel because you did not separate the trumas and maisus. Says Ram Halamaza Duma, what could be this the kabir to? L'nivlas hasharf. Let's say the dead, unslaughtered ox, the nivlas hasen, the nevela of a sheep, the nivlas hatzvi, and the nevela of a deer. Sheim and stuff like guys, they can combine for the sheep because kamash be'anu, like we explain in Perek Dal Lochi Yitzayin, where since it's the same negative prohibition, although that's a deer and that's an ox, but it's the same isser of nevela, so the same thing would apply to that of tevel, although that's one type of food, there's another one, it's going to combine, but it's the same isser of tevel. Halacha Zayin. Ha'ich lachila gedayla. If someone eats a large quantity of food, many kizaysim without stopping, midava asa from something that's forbidden, say imachayv and say malchus like karas like kol kizayis for kizayis. You're not going to say he's liable of a separate set of lashes or karas for every single olive size of the issue that is eating. Rather, he's liable for one liability for the whole act of eating. Now, but let's say there were witnesses who were warning him, which you have to have a warning to get lashes. For every kazayis, every olive size eating, don't eat. They're warning him, if you eat, you're going to get punished. So then he's liable for every single warning. Even though it's one act of eating and didn't stop, but ultimately before every kazayis they warn him, and it's a new act of a kazayis, he'll be liable on each one a separate set of lashes. Halacha ches. Let's say let's say someone ate the size of a barley corn or the size of a mustard seed from whatever one of the types of prohibited food items. And they waved it a little bit. And then they ate from that prohibited entity the size of a mustard seed. And he continued doing this until he completed eating the amount of an olive. So they did a mistake with it liberally. If the amount of time it took from the beginning till the end, till he finally ate the size of gazais, was kedei achila shalosh beitzim, the amount of time that it takes to eat 3 eggs worth, which is a well-known machlokes Rambam and Rashi. Rambam says it's what's called kedei achilas pras, which is a half a loaf. In Talmudic times, a loaf had 2 meals worth, and 1 meal's worth, the Rambam says, is 3 eggs worth. Rashi famously says in Psachim in different places that the shiva pras is 4 eggs. Rambam says 3 eggs, which that's a certain amount of time, which in today's poskim, there's differences of, is it 3, 4 minutes, 12 minutes, 9 minutes, there's different measurements, but it's based on how long would it take, according to the Rambam, to eat 3 eggs worth. If he ate it in that amount of time, within that amount of time, Yitzar Fakol, then all those mustard seed sizes would combine, and you ate a share of a kazais, malchus, a carbon, then you'd be liable, whatever the punishment was, karis or malchus or a carbon, as if he ate the olive size at one time. Now, but let's say it tarried, it delayed more than the amount of time to eat 3 eggs till he finally accumulated to be the size of kazayis. Then even if he didn't even stop in between, rather the very slow eater, he's eating mustard seed after mustard, he didn't stop. But since it didn't complete to be the size of an olive, more than the time it takes to eat a half a loaf of bread, which the Rambam says is the 3 eggs worth, they're not going to combine, upater, and he's going to be exempt from the liability of the lashes or whatever the liability is. Halachates, that's regarding eating. So to someone who's drinking revius shall stam yena ma'at ma'at. He's drinking a revius of regular wine of a non-Jew, which is forbidden. He's drinking a little bit at a time. Oh, another case, chametz by Pesach, or he dissolved chametz on Pesach. Oh yes, a chaylev or forbidden fats. And he's sipping it, he's swallowing it little by little. He's drinking from blood little bit at a little bit. So it depends. Im sham mitchil batzayv kedishtis revius with the share of kedais by solids is that of revius by liquids, by beverages. So if it took the amount of time from the beginning to end, within the amount of time that it takes normally to drink revius, then mitzdarfen is going to combine, and one is going to be liable. V'mlav, if it's not going to make it in that amount of time, the name mitzdarfen, then it's not going to combine. Halacha the Rambam continues regarding the prohibition of eating certain entities and regarding to how one gets the pleasure of doing that. Says the Rambam, Kalachol ha'asurin, all the prohibited food items, in you're not liable for them, again, for the penalty. Of course, one's not allowed to eat, but the liability is until he eats it in the way that one normally derives pleasure from it. Chutz, there's two exceptions. Mibasa b'chalav, the prohibition of eating milk and meat together. V'kilai kerem, and the forbidden mixture in a vineyard. The reason why they're different is achila. Meaning, achila, eating, is the normal way how people normally eat. Those two prohibitions doesn't even say eating. The prohibition that we know about eating them is actually derived from a different terminology. Either b'lashem bishul, by Basel Chav says which Chacham say it says it 3 times. One that means that of the prohibition of eating, or it's derived from a Kavachayim, from like the Rambam says if cooking is forbidden for sure eating, but it never tells you anything about eating. It's using terminology of cooking, so it doesn't tell you the prohibition of the is the way as people normally eat. And so to Vashana Hektish, regarding Klayim, it says Pentiktish Amalea, that you're not supposed to have benefit, rather you should burn it. So therefore it's telling you it's forbidden to have the eating, even if it's not in the normal way of having pleasure, because it doesn't say eating, but when it says eating, it's got to be in the normal way how a person usually has pleasure. So it says Ram Halachi, so Ketzad. So how so? Ram defines over here what's considered eating in the way that's not the normal way of eating or having pleasure. Which, again, that's like regular types of isum that it says prohibition of eating, so it's got to be in the normal way. Some dissolves forbidden fats. And he swallows it when it's hot. Until it burns his throat. He's eating raw fats. He's mixing bitter things. He's mixing gall and wormwood into the yayin nesach. Or tapat of non-kosher meat that there was nevela. And he's eating when it's bitter. Or he's eating a forbidden food item after it decayed, and spoiled, and it's unfit for human consumption. Sari is a pater, and some in these last cases actually would be mutter. He's going to be exempt because again, it's not in the normal way how people normally eat or have pleasure from these prohibited items. Now, but if let's say he mixes something bitter, in a pot of meat and milk, or in the wine of Klayim that was with wheat and barley that grew in that same vineyard. He took that wine from that vineyard, and he ate it with something bitter mixed in. Chayim, again, like we said, those two cases would be liable because there it's even that one is going to be chayim. Halachid base. If someone, let's say, eats from forbidden food items, there's chayik in a joke, or he was distracted without any intent to eat this prohibited item. So although in these two cases his intention was not to eat the actual prohibited item, but since he did get pleasure, it has a good taste, it's delicious, so Chayv is going to be liable, as if he had intention for the actual eating itself. Because it's called, he got the pleasure, and therefore he has the liability. Now, but if any pleasure that comes to a person against his will, the Isser Mikol Yisurin, from whatever the prohibition actually is, whether it's something that's prohibited to have benefit or prohibited to eat, in this and if the person is intending to get that pleasure, so then also it's going to be forbidden. But if he didn't intend, then mutter, then it's going to be permitted, because we know we rule like Rabbi Shimon, who holds Davashin Miskaven is mutter by all Yisurim. If it's unintended, so then he's not going to be liable. And it's actually even permitted because there's nothing over here that the person is intending to go ahead and do. But really, it means that he's going to be exempt. And Lacha Yigimel Rambam continues regarding what does one do regarding a prohibited food item at a time of danger. So Halacha Yigimel says, if someone eats something forbidden, l'te'avan, for desire, or because he's hungry, so then Chayiv is going to be liable for eating not kosher. But let's say he was astray in the desert, he was lost, he has nothing to eat but something that's prohibited. So he's a mutam, so then that's permitted because of danger to one's life. For sakanas nefashos, that overrides the isser of eating non-kosher. Halacha Yudal. Let's say ubara, a pregnant woman who, what's unique about her is that when she smells something and she desires it, it's dangerous if one refrains from giving her that food. So sharicha machalasa, what happens if she smells a prohibited food item? Could go b'sar kodesh like kosher meat or b'sar chazer or the meat of swine. So halacha is we can't hold it back from her because it would be dangerous. So for machil noisa min hamadak, first we give her to eat from the gravy, not from the actual swine itself. If it calms her down and puts her at ease, that's good. If that's not sufficient, make sure we give it from the swine or from the kosher meat itself, but less than the measurement, to give less than the kazayas. If that doesn't calm her down, we give her whatever she needs from the prohibited food item until it puts her mind at ease. A sick person, if he smells something that has vinegar, or with similar types of food items, that it awakens a desire in the soul, and he's a sick person. So Dina Kabar, again, he has the same halacha like a pregnant woman, because it's dangerous for him not to have it. We do the same procedure until it calms him down. Now look at the Zayin. In contrast, Misha Chaze Bulmas, someone that is overcome with a disease that causes extreme hunger. So we immediately, we don't do that procedure as we said about the gravy and less than the shir. We immediately give him from the fapuda items until it lightens up his eyes, because there is actually a stage of that illness that it causes a weakness in his eyes. And we don't try looking after something that's permitted. So we quickly give him whatever is found. But we give him the lesser type of isser first, and so that if we don't have to violate the more stringent isser if we don't have to. If that opens and lightens his eyes, that's sufficient. If not, then you give him the more severe thing. As Rambam says, Allah is case at house so. So let's say there's nothing kosher over here that's going to work. But we have in front of us untyped produce, and we have nevela, a dead animal, meaning a cow that wasn't slaughtered properly. So machilnos in nevela tchila. So first we give him the cow, which is the animal that wasn't slaughtered. Why? Shatevel b'misa, because untyped produce is misa b'dei shemayim. Nevela is only a negative prohibition, because we're talking about tevel that didn't separate truma gedela and trumas meisters. So therefore, since tevel is the more severe, we give him the nevela. Let's say nevela svicha shvius. Let's say you have a dead animal or non-kosher meat, often from a cow. It's just didn't have Jewish slaughtering. Svicha shvius, and you have the aftergrowth of a shemitah year, which is also prohibited to eat. We give him the aftergrowth from the shemitah year. Where that is only rabbinically prohibited. Like we can explain in Hilchos in Perek Dal Halacha Beis, and therefore obviously we're going to give him the rabbinic isser before giving the nevela, which is a biblical isser. Let's say there's tevel shvius, there's untyped produce and shemitah produce after the time of beer when you have to get rid of it and you're not allowed to eat it. You give him the shemitah produce because tevel is misa b'dei and shemitah produce is only a positive commandment that's being violated. Tevel truma, let's say you have untyped produce and truma produce. So, im ef shalasak the tevel, if you cannot fix the tevel, meaning if you could quickly go ahead and separate the trumas and maizers and give him that which is now chulin, of course you're going to do that. But it's just not possible to rectify the tevel. And the reason for that is because, let's say the sick person needs to eat whatever that quantity is. If you can separate the trumas, it's not going to be sufficient, and he's going to have to end up eating the trumas part of that you separated anyway. So if it's not possible to fix the tevel, machil nois say tevel, then you give him the untyped produce, she'ena kaddish truma, because that's not as sanctified, thus more severe, as the truma. Because tevel, since you could quote unquote fix it, it doesn't have such a severe level of kedusha. Conscious truma is itself kaddish, so therefore you're going to give him the tevel and not that of the truma. If there's anything similar like that, you're going to give him the more lesser isser, and if that doesn't work, then the more severe isser. Now, Rambam talks about regarding combining prohibitions in one act of eating, in the same act of eating. As Rambam says, Kvar Biyan already explained in Perek Zayin from Hilchos Rabbi and Halacha Ches to Yud, she'ein nisachal l'issa, that when something is already prohibited, you cannot add on a new isser. It's already prohibited. Ela im, three exceptions. If the two prohibitions are taking effect at the same time, so no one is more than the other, so they both then take effect. Or there was an increase of something that prohibited on this entity, or it's including other people or other entities in that, therefore that then gets included. So Lefikach says Rambam, therefore, because of this concept, you could have someone that's going to eat one olive size of a food item, and they can get 5 sets of lashes for that one kazais. And that is, obviously you have to warn him for the 5 different prohibitions that are gathered here in that one kazais. You have to warn him for those things. Ram says, for example, a tummy person, that eats an olive size of the prohibited fats of the chaylev, that's left over from a carbon, Loika, he's going to get lashes b'shum eichel chaylev because of the prohibited fats, which, as we said in Halacha Alf, anything that the liability is karsa midei shemayim, we give lashes if you warn them for lashes. So you can say lashes for the chaylev. Umshum eichel naisa because it's leftovers of the kachim. Umshum eichel b'yom kippurim for eating yom kippurim. Umshum tamish eichel kodesh because he's a tamei person eating kachim. Umshum shenenim not kodesh shemayim because he's having benefit from kachim, which he's not supposed to, and he's misappropriating. Those are 5 different liabilities. So as Rambam explains the Lochi test, v'lama chol kan iser aleh. So didn't I say when something prohibited, it cannot be prohibited from more items? So why over here are you going to have one, another, and another, have 5 isurim on this one gezais? So Rambam explains. Shebehemazu, he goes through the process. This animal, hayechel ba'asa b'achila. So automatically, from the moment this animal is created, its fats, those fats, are forbidden to be eaten. But, you're allowed to have benefit from it because chaylev is only asa b'achila. Now, hikdisha, when someone is makdish, he sanctifies this animal to be as a carbon. Oh, nesra chelba b'hanoya. Now the fats become not just forbidden to eat, forbidden to have benefit because hektish, which is what it is right now, is forbidden to have benefit. Oh, now since it takes effect on it, an additional isser of having benefit from it, which is called the isser meisav, something is increasing a prohibition in this entity itself. So nicer love isser kachim. So now, in regards to the eating, you also have the isser kachim taking effect in it because there's an increased isser taking effect. So the isser kachim is taking effect. Now, but still, this fats were permitted to Hashem to be sacrificed on the mizbech. But Ras Lahedit, it was prohibited for a regular person, as we said. Now, Nasa Nicer, when it was left over, the time a carbon is supposed to be eaten, some are a day and a night, some are 2 days and a night, but when it's left over that amount of time, now that you're adding on the Isser for Hashem, can't use it as a carbon anymore, no one could eat in the context of kachim anymore. So that's lahadid. So that's what's called isser meisav. It's adding on something to this entity itself that not only was it usher to a person, now it's also usher for the mizbeach. So therefore, that's isser meisav. It's going to be another isser for a regular person too. Now, now that was up until now in the object. Now we're talking about in the person. Someone's going to eat this olive-sized piece of chaylev. Up until now, he was permitted, this person, in the meat of the animal, but he was forbidden in the fats. Now, but nitma, when he becomes tamei, nesaf b'bsar, becomes forbidden even in the meat, even if he's able to eat the meat. Now there's tamei, a tamei person now eat from kachim, noisabla yisrael chaylev. So since it's taking effect on the animal, so that's what's called, it's adding on, for here, you have not just the meat that's usher. Now that he's tamei, the chaylev is going to be included in that a tamei person eating from a carbon, which the chaylev is part of that. And boy, Yom Kippurim, it comes Yom Kippurim, kol echol, the person is forbidden in all food items. Since he's forbidden even in chulin items, so noisav isuroi b'chaylev zeh. So including what he's not allowed to eat, it includes any food item, including this chaylev, which that's called iser kail, which is not adding anything more to this piece, but it's included in the people that are involved, which is this person being forbidden in other entities, not just in this chaylev, but in other chulin. So including all food items is this piece of chaylev. So therefore, that's number 5. And says Rambam, was there anything like that which is going to have either because it's happening at the same time or because it's a meisav, as a kail, one could be eating one olive the size of a prohibited food item and be getting more than one set of lashes.